My conversation today on Behind the Act is with Jim Gray. He's a music industry and entertainment entrepreneur. We're talking about the importance of self-care and personal creativity, the challenges of balancing business and personal life, and the value of clear communication in the music industry. I'm Seth Schaefer. This is Behind the Act with Jim Gray. I hear record label, and A, I get confused, and B, I feel skeptical, mainly because of some past experiences that I've run into personally, which we didn't talk about, but that's unimportant. So, and coming from the film side, the music industry people that I dealt with were always the sleaziest, just to be candid. I haven't felt that working in the music business in Nashville yet, but working outside, especially with management and labels, it was like they were the weirdest people to deal with. So I ask you, what is a label? And I realize that what you do, sorry, I'm talking a lot, but I realize what you do is different than other labels. But just generally speaking, what is a label and how do you see what you do?
So labels exist, at least in my world, my perspective, that they existed to sort of like help, bridge the gap between, the fans and all the business part. Because a lot of times, an artist would come to me, they'd be like, well, I just want to be the artist. I want somebody else to handle all that for me. Well, in a lot of ways that's defined as management or what have you. The label, their job is more like marketing the music project itself. And then as, time has gone on, a label came to mean a lot of different things. So it's not surprising that in this day and age, we have a hybrid versions of a label that could be artist development, artist management, distribution, marketing, and all the other ballyhoo that comes with all that. And I'd say that Gray Artist Services functions as a label, but it's really because we got into that because we wanted to have more control creatively and financially long-term over like the continuity thread of the artist and their albums, projects or stories, if you will. Mm-hmm. And so the reason that I got into that was more because it's like, well, if we have distribution and we're getting pitched to editorial teams, and then we're working with because we were already doing all that work with finding the best, we're trying to find the right producers and people to write with and all the other things that involved. I was like, man, and the term I kept hearing was that, well, let me go back. I started asking a lot of questions of artists. They would come to me with questions like, man, I would love to know how to get onto Spotify playlists, or I'd love to get my YouTube video more views, or I'd love to get distribution and get pitched to editorial playlists because I could, it's hit or miss if, other, more, easy, do-it-yourself platforms would do that for you. Also, the label gave me a stronger story to tell my story for, really for like business development and having a brand. And it also would help the artist with, it's all about, in my world, it's all about leveraging relationships.
Right.
And,
you said more control. What do you mean by that?
Meaning control of I would say creative control, or more, it's not even control isn't maybe the best term, but more of having more ownership, if you will, of the whole thread of the story. And yes, I've heard about the sleazy part for years. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to be highly relational, but also, I wanted to be honest. I wanted I want to respect the dignity and integrity of every artist and their projects, and my own dignity and integrity was important. And I think that on some levels, when I'm wanting to work with somebody, I listen to what they want to do. And I'll ask. I said, I've asked you. What is your big goal that you want? And then, because it also matters that the the person that you're going to be working with in the music industry, it matters what their values are and what they want to get out of the thing. Like that's very important. I think that the fear is that with a lot of artists, at least on the artist side, is that there's somebody there that's like greedy that wants to take everything. In my mind, I represent, if you want to look at the, like, I'm a big fan of the Christmas Carol book and the films, right? But if you look at his story, Scrooge is very almost greedy. It is really not greedy. He's just like very shrewd about everything he does. He's obviously making money off of like real estate and rentals. He's basically a landlord. He's rental control in that story, right? But then after the pivot with Three Ghosts and everything, he has this transformation, and it represents it like he's like he became the best uncle and boss and all those other things, and everybody's like, man, I really like post-Ghost Scrooge. And I think in a lot of ways, I look to represent, Scrooge after the ghosts.
I have a question. Well, I guess let me start off with an assumption. I think that most people are not unethical out to try to screw people over.
Yeah.
And circumstances, especially with music deals, I mean, as we've been talking, like the music industry is complicated. How to do that well is complicated. I feel like solid communication is usually it's what's lacking. And when I say communication, it's probably more understanding, not necessarily what wasn't said even, right? So how do you set yourself up and the artists that you work with to be successful and to have a good relationship, other than like, the trust of like, you're a good guy, you're taking care of me, but like knowing on the front end, like what do you help them make sure that they're taken care of to enable you to do a good job for them? And
Great questions. I would say that it helped when I spent more time figuring out what I was offering, being very clear in what I was going to offer somebody, because there might be everybody has different needs and different things that they're looking for. It's almost like if you're going to redo the floors, there's certain types of flooring you're going to look at, or the windows or whatnot, and there's window vendors and all that sort of thing. The more that I sat down and took the time to figure out what I was going to offer and being clear about that and how I was going to communicate that, the better things would be. Because again, everybody has their own a way of approaching it. It's not, and I've just learned that it's not one size fit all. And I've told the story on another podcast a while back about, I remember the first time I got a deal for somebody or the idea of a deal, meaning like for them to go out on tour with somebody. And I'd met with a friend of mine, and scheduled a meeting, leverage my relationship. And the guy's like, oh man, you're working with so-and-so. I absolutely want to do that. And I'll start the process to cut a check for that today and put that in motion. And I was like, oh man, I got, gave him a high five, whatever, or hug, and said goodbye, and got into my truck and called this artist. And I was like, man, I got some really good news for you. And he goes, tell me. And I was like, man, this guy's offered, and you go out on tour with him, whatever. And I remember the artist saying, well, I don't really know if I want to do that. And I was like, wait, what? Are you kidding me? I'm like, this is a big deal. Like I stuck my neck out for you. Like I went on your behalf to this. And he goes, no, I totally appreciate that. But he's like, what's the real value of that? And I learned then that it doesn't matter. I had to just keep making offers of that sort. I couldn't stop.
yeah,
I couldn't take it personally. I couldn't stop, and I couldn't give up. But I just had to know that like sometimes I was going to find something for somebody, and I learned more about the due diligence of seeing something all the way through. That being said, that artist and I are now here in the present, like doing some things together that I couldn't have ever foreseen. Like that.
yeah.
That's when we do true discovery and we're patient and we don't give up. I think that a lot of success in the music industry comes from just like the consistency of time and not giving up and being your like thinking through your process and thinking through your relationships. And, it's really important to me that I go through, have I done everything I said I was going to do?
Right.
Because sometimes I haven't, or I forgot. I'm like, oh my goodness, I forgot to do that. I need to go fix that.
Right.
I did that yesterday because I was like, man, I don't think I got, like, did I get that song scheduled? And I had to go look through my list, all
Right.
the checklists.
That makes so much sense. And what you're saying with having multiple hats that you're wearing, and it's a per artist thing. Let's talk about focus, the lack of focus, but then also the single umbrella concept, right? I've heard you, I'm paraphrasing, so correct me on anything I misstate, but I've heard you mentioning ideas around media management and marketing and, talks about sync, talks about however you're going to be, engaging with each one of your artists. How do you make sure, A, that you're keeping all the balls in the air the right way, but you're also giving everything enough attention for what you need to serve?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. When it comes to productivity, one of the biggest resources that I have now is I have an executive coach who helps me with almost like auditing or reviewing every month, and maybe more often I need a call, like restructuring my productivity or like my prioritization. Things like the Eisenhower model, where it's like what is the prioritization? You look at this box and it's like highly important, less important. These like I'll paraphrase it, but it's like these 4 boxes, and you're looking at that like what's the biggest priority, or what are some things that need to just be delegated or cut out. I use a mixture of Notion and Trello to do some of that. Really depends on what the Trello is great for, just like making lists of things and checking things off. But using a lot of landing page technology now to, like, if I'm going to make an offer to somebody, I just have a landing page for that.
Yeah.
For instance, I have a lot of people reaching out now because apparently my marketing's working, because I'm getting direct messages from people. Well, I was like, well, I can't talk to all those people.
Right.
And so I created a landing page with a contact form and said, hey, watch thrilled that you're reaching out. Thank you. Fill out this form, watch these videos, fill out this form if you're interested, and then, and we'll book a call with you.
Right. On that, sorry to interrupt. I mean, so we were talking earlier about a different service. What the service is doesn't matter. It's just one of the services that you could provide. And you said, I'm not certain that I want to provide that because I'm not sure if it's helpful or a distraction.
Yep.
So I have 2 questions that really, like, how do you determine whether or not you do add something to your service offerings? But then how do you also provide services that you offered before when you realize that they're not helping you or the artist that you're working with?
Yeah, I think that I learned somewhere in the recent future, maybe in the past couple of years, I was working with somebody and people would say, well, what do you think? Or what do you think about that? And a lot of times, I don't know if I'm capable of instant feedback. I need time to sort of like think about that. If I've got a lot of things going on, I don't have like an instant valve of feedback. And so I needed to think about like what sort of feedback would I give somebody, right? And then as far as like, I think constantly reviewing process and redesigning process in real time to help the flow of things has really helped. I love analog process. So I've got a journal somewhere around here that I left. I love paper journals. I have a big roll of butcher paper, or it's not butcher paper, but it's art paper that looks like butcher paper. But I roll that out on a big table. And in some seasons, I have like 2 tables of butcher paper. And one is for all the services that I'm offering and what do those look like. I'm kind of like about once a month now, I'm recalibrating all that internal process for my company. And then the other table is all of like like it's basically like joint ventures that I have because that's important too, and I have to rethink and reframe all that. And but the butcher paper helps me like identify, what are all my processes for like, let's say it could be anything. What are all the steps involved? Like even down to like I text this person and if they respond, then I X. So it's like what are all the steps? Because a couple of years ago I went and reviewed some steps I had in processes and I was doing way too much people pleasing, thinking that I had to do all these things when in fact like nobody was paying attention to that.
Right.
Now, however, now here in the present, I learned that those things actually have value because there's other people that watch those things. The only way you're going to get more promotional consideration sometimes is if you are promoting things during a marketing campaign.
Right.
And so that's super important that I was marketing it, the artist is marketing it, and then because the other parties are watching that in like a lot of distribution situations. So in this season in particular, I'm reviewing everything. And if we're going to build something new, there has to be a process for it. There has to be a communication for it. Because if we're going out and we're going to vet people like yourself to be involved in a project or an idea, we have to be able to communicate with you. We have to be able to communicate with the other entity that we would provide those solutions to and ourselves. And then how are we going to track all that? And then how are we going to decide whether we want to stop?
Right. Yeah.
Because I've been on all the sides of that. I've been somebody's manager when we're figuring out these things. I've been like the label hat. I have a big closet. I have a closet in my house, and the upper shelf is just full of hats. There's like, I won't tell you how many hats, but there's a lot of hats. I have a lot of hats to choose from.
Literally. Right.
I need an executive coach to help me make better hat selection choices.
That's amazing.
But
I love it.
I think I answered your question, but
Yeah,
it's more
no.
like just, what is the thought process involved of like, how do we make better decisions? Because as a natural creative, what I didn't need was more choices, although the time that I have that's set aside for creative writing is as important as anything else I do, whether it's fitness or work or eating dinner.
Right.
Like that creative time has to be protected. Operating in do not disturb mode is like a gift that I give myself. And it's as important as journaling about gratitude every day, right? And reminding ourselves of, creatives can be sometimes we can be very negative or we want to complain, and I have kind of a no complaint rule when it comes to things. That's why I started expressing gratitude more because I was like, man, I had gotten some feedback from some friends that I was like, could be very negative at times, like surprisingly so. And I took a good hard look at that and I was like, yeah, that's not healthy.
No. Last week's episode, he talked about the importance of being tenacious, especially when you're getting into a new industry or a new art form. And I have sensed from you, I mean, it's the only second time we've met, but you've been tenacious and communicate well. And when we met at Vo's show and Lost Terra and Slow Tide, like there were people around that. Obviously, that was a funny meeting where we all knew. I mean, everybody knew each other, and
it was like a Colorado. Well, let's go back because we're. Well, I'm not originally from Colorado, but we came to Nashville from Colorado.
Right.
Both of us did, which is unique.
Yep. Yeah.
By the way, do you ever get people, just as a side note, do you ever have people here ask you why you left Colorado for Nashville? Because it seems like everybody here wants to move to Colorado or out west.
Yeah, they're like, oh, why would you move here?
Yeah, I get that a lot.
Yeah.
But yeah, that night at that EP release show was unique in that it was like a reunion of Colorado.
Yeah.
Even the band,
Everybody was laughing.
a lot of people in all the bands were from Colorado. We were from Colorado. Our friend Corey was from Colorado, and another photographer guy who was there.
I think Rob Maroney posted Denver, Tennessee.
That's right. That's right.
I think it was him. Anyway,
That's right.
it made me laugh.
But that was a unique night. And I pay close attention to those types of gatherings like that where I meet a group of people, and I'll often spend a lot of time sort of like migrating through who is all there, and then how do I go back and how do I go and establish connection with them so that moments like this happen on a podcast.
Yeah. So that's a question that I have
Yeah.
for you is around the tenacity or the, whatever word we
Yeah.
want it, the zeal or,
Yeah. Yeah.
the excitement. How do you balance, having that, putting that energy out to do the networking and the connecting and to know the people, with the journaling and really the creative writing that you mentioned earlier? Like, I want to be more creative for me on top of enabling other people to be creative. So how are you balancing that?
So I start, well, morning habits are big. And during the pandemic, the first example that I have is during the pandemic, I started walking. It's almost like in the Forrest Gump movie, if you've ever seen that. He,
One of my favorite movies.
right? He puts on, Jenny had bought him, though she just left him. Spoiler alert, in case you haven't seen it. If you haven't seen Forrest Gump, now's your time. But, he gets she had bought him those shoes, and he just stands up and just takes off from his front porch and starts running. And he's like, I just felt like going for a run. And one day, literally during the pandemic, I was living in East Nashville, and I'd bought a pair of used Hokas somewhere from an online store, and just started walking. And I started with a mile. And then one day I had something happen with a client, and I'd been up at that point walking 2 miles. And that day I walked 3. So I kind of like broke through my own barrier, right? Well, now I haven't really done it much this year, but this time last year I was walking about 40 miles a week, all outdoors. So I almost became like an ultra marathon walker,
Nice.
right? I have gear to walk in the back of my car, at least to change of shorts and a dry fit shirt and a pair of shoes and a ball cap, so I can go and walk anywhere, even if I was on the way home today from podcasting. So habits are super important. So like this morning, I started off my day with morning pages. So I wrote 3 handwritten pages of content. It's like a mind dump, kind of get me prepped for the day. I went for a walk. I had coffee. I did some meditation, and I got cleaned up, and then made sure I looked at my calendar. All the things are in today. I definitely have different days that are different focuses. Like yesterday, I was in the office all day, and I started at, my day started at 6:30, and I was in the office. But that includes like Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday are usually really long days for me. But that's because I'm doing a lot of different things and a lot of different roles in that time. But I also like to, sometimes it allows me to move slower, if you will. Like, so I'm able to like slow down and do all those morning things are super important. And then, have lunch and take a nap if I need to, because rest is really important, especially if you're an emotional creative like I am. And then I have this other thing that like, I'm not naturally extroverted. So I run out of like people fuel sometimes, or relationship fuel, or just energy for more meetings. It doesn't like recalibrate like a natural extrovert would. So I have to do certain things to keep that energy going. But anyway, so getting out of the house helps me. Having days like this or half days or whatever, where I'm like out meeting people, like kind of gives me a recharge, and then I can go for a long time off of that.
Yep.
Today it's like, we're podcasting, and then tonight I've got a writer's round. So I know that tomorrow is going to be low key.
Right.
I don't have a bunch of meetings scheduled intentionally, because I'm going to kind of need to regroup.
Yep. I'm totally the same way.
Yeah.
I have to recalibrate. The podcast is the way that I am social.
That's right. That's
Like,
your extroversion, or it mimics the extroversion you would have as a human, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of times I use social media and podcasting and other forms to like extrovert where I can't. I just don't have I don't have it in me.
Yeah.
In my DNA or on my core to do it. But when I know somebody really well and I'm comfortable with them, I'll never shut up.
Right.
But the tenacity involved is all about like energy management and time management, people management, managing those relationships, prioritizing everything over and over again, and then giving yourself space to know that like there's going to be weeks where you're going to have a ton of meetings like I did last week, and then this week where it's a little bit more of like I call it a core week, where you get to kind of like you can kind of like go as deep internally as you want, or look at a process and tear it apart.
Yeah.
And but always going back to the same methodology and mechanics for every day in general. And then there's things in the music industry that bother me, to be honest, like people that want to meet, have all these face to face, like, hey, I would love to go to coffee and pick your brain, or I love to go to coffee. It's like, so that's why I have partnered with the writers round, so I can invite people to that, or uh, other group type of things that I could do, or hey, let's just get on the phone and talk.
Yeah.
There's certain people, if I get but if I get introduced to somebody by somebody else, more than likely I'm going to try to meet with them. I'm also very stubborn. I'm very set in my ways. I'm 55 years old. Like I probably have a few bad habits not even aware of. But for the most part, try to do the same thing every day. And I'm also learning that sometimes I've got to get out of the office and have a day, like I come here to your studio in your house that's outside of where I live, and come podcast. And a day like this, I can function off of for a long time. So I think one key ingredient is understanding ourselves and our self-awareness and self-management. And that leads to empathy and understanding, empathy and compassion for others and their journeys, which leads to like better decision-making along the way.
Right.
And, but yeah.
Your list of the way that you start your day and exercising and walking 40 miles a week, it sounds so much like you have everything figured out, and oh my gosh, look at how well you do. Are you nice to yourself?
No. No, actually, I am Jim Gray's. I was formerly Jim Gray's own worst critic, and I was very hard on Jim Gray. And then, on my social media, there's this picture I posted, I think it was last week or the week before. And at one point, probably in 2011, I was up to about 250 pounds physically. I'm down to like, I fluctuate between like 185 and 190. And I've learned to give grace to that version of Jim Gray because all the things he was going through. And he was running on fumes all the time, he had anxiety, he had like high blood pressure, like all these issues. And so now that I've done all that work for all these years and changed, and I'm not even the same person anymore in a lot of ways, is that there are days when all of that, like this morning, I did not feel like leaving the house.
Yep.
I was in the funk. I call it the funk. But some days you got to get through the darkness of the forest of funk to get to like the ocean of the glimmer. I call, my friend of mine refers to the glimmer. And if you get through the day of funk and work through that, you'll get to the glimmer as the reward.
Yeah. Does that present itself as what would traditionally be called depression for you?
Yeah, I would say it'd be called.
You want to stay home and sit on the couch.
Oh yeah, yeah, and I want to be alone, and it's also my natural state of like I wanted to sit somewhere by myself and drink coffee, and ruminate and pontificate, and that's important too.
Oh yeah,
and probably tomorrow I'm going to go. Sip coffee and write at least, but the other part is that I run a business, and the simple fact is that I have people that I do things for and with, and it's also important that I do. So the more healthier I am, the more high performing I can be. But then none of those people are trying to kill themselves, but in my world, it's like I'm single, I'm an empty nester, I don't have a dog, I don't even have a plant to take care of. So a lot of times in my free time, I'm working on me and myself, and those around me, loving on others and my clients. And then now I'm in this new phase where I'm sort of like, um, I I made a deal with myself. I was going to like work really hard for 6 weeks and take some days off. And when is that going to happen? And then I have people in my life that hold me accountable to that. Like,
Good.
hey, even my clients are like, yeah, you need to take the day off.
Yeah.
Rest is super important. I use the term Sabbath. I use it somewhat loosely, but like having a day of rest of some sort is really important. And for me, that looks like a personal, like a PTO day. It's like take myself to breakfast or take myself out to coffee or go see a movie. I love going to the Belcourt Theater, reading a book, going for a nice long walk in Shelby Park. Man, and actually, I'd love to. I sometimes go spend the whole day out in the park.
Yep.
Get some food, some water in the car, and all that. So and on the creative side, Julia Cameron, who wrote a book years ago called The Artist Way, is all about, that's where morning pages come from and all those ideas. She has in there called The Artist Date. And I'm a big fan of the idea of like taking yourself out, maybe you take yourself out to food, but then you go to a museum or go watch a film or do something that's going to like increase your curiosity, your wonder. I think these days a lot of people are listening to and reading the book by Rick Rubin called The Creative
Act.
The Creative Act. Yep.
Yep.
A lot of people are discussing that book. I think I was having a conversation with a client yesterday because of a lot of the conversation he and I have had about our own creative development and management. For years, I'll say this again and again, for years I ran off of fumes, personally and professionally in a lot of ways. And creatively, it's like I want to be able to make things and not get paid for it. I don't want to. I just want to make.
Yep.
I want to create, and just it's like in high school and in college. It's like you were just creating to create as a kid, and as I've gone back and looked at like what I want to do in the present, it's like, man, I want to go back and rediscover what I feel like I never got to finish.
Yeah.
And I owe it to myself and those around me to like be the best version of Jim Gray that I can be, if that makes sense. But and then having tools like morning pages, which is basically like daily writing of some sort. It's basically an essay.
Right.
It's a 3-page essay. So just programming yourself to like sit down, not look at your phone, which is really difficult, and not look out the window and not turn on the TV and not do all that, not be distracted and just write 3 pages of content because a lot of great things come out of those sessions. And then writing a lot of poetry these days. It's like this. Poetry is a great way to express how you think and how you feel in like one stream of thought.
Right.
And to be artistic. And then you can post that wherever and people are like, oh man, I love your poem. And you're like, yeah, you wouldn't believe what that's about.
How have you, I guess, I'm just thinking about the irony of having a label that creates, and this is for me too, right? Like that creates creative content for people. And then that you're entirely right. Like getting paid for art loses some magic for some reason, but also I want to create art that makes money, which is a little bit different on the timing front. Like I'm like getting paid to make something doesn't feel as good, but if I make something and then somebody buys it, I love that.
Exactly. Because it's like but I think somewhere, and I'm paraphrasing, that Seth Godin at one point said that, you should never really sell your true art. There's like, for me, at times, there were times when my art protected me when I was a youth. There were things going on in my life, whether it was school or at home or relationship or who knows. And I was also very moody. Like, and I learned that sometimes the hard way, but from feedback from people. But but knowing, again, it's like knowing who we are and getting back to our creative source. For me, it's like my creativity like protected me in a way. It protected me as a child because I would read and I would write and I would daydream. Now it's like it's a more like assumed form or a natural form of who I am. But a lot of people they've met me in the past somewhere and just thought that was like, oh, that's and we label people like that's Jim, he's a blank.
Yep.
But if you really got to know me, you know that like I don't have a super thick skin. Some of the process I have built is because I don't have a thick skin. Some of the process is built because I am sensitive. Some of the process is built because I am an emotional creative. And there's days where I just can't. I do it gladly.
Yeah.
But I think developing all this process to help others, the one thing is I wanted to build something that would empower others and inspire them.
Yeah. How does not having thick skin manifest itself for you?
Man, like, sometimes I'll be sitting around, I'll be like working on something somewhere and somebody will say something and because I was raised in a family, well, so I was raised in far northern California, and my father is a logger, meaning like a lumberjack.
Yeah.
It's like what people think of like Axemen TV show. That Axemen is pretty much my family, just not the theatrical version. But and so when you're raised around somebody who's like the term facetious, where it's like they could say things to you and keep a straight face, and when you come from that sort of background, like sometimes I'm facetious, but if I'm in the wrong if I'm not in the right mood and then someone wants to give me a hard time because they think I operate like that all the time, they're like, oh, and then I'm like, hey, it didn't hit me that hit me the wrong way, and I sort of have to, but I've had to be careful that sometimes like that people might, I learned years ago, I was working for a company and there was a lot of guys there that would do practical jokes and stuff like, mess with one another. And I just remember my boss at the time reminding me, he's like, he goes, I wouldn't start with that guy if I were you.
Yep.
There are people like that in the world
yeah.
that like, once you start that, it'll never stop. But a lot of times I'm, people that are around me that when they know you and they love you and you can trust them and all of that, you give each other a hard time and it's like an exchange.
Yeah.
But yeah, the thick skin thing, I'm learning that the thick skin part comes from just like most of the time that's actually has something to do with your self-awareness.
I also think it is a way to, well, you can be jaded really easily.
Well, vulnerability is like all the rage right now. Vulnerability and transparency and honesty and all that. I'm big into giving people like honest feedback about things. And I learned that by more by my own experience, and that a lot of times I was like trying to like smooth things over when I was like, that's actually not good business practice. Good business practice is actually sometimes saying things really difficult ways in a very cordial way, right?
Yeah.
And so what I was learning was that the thick skin part was more like, oh, I just wasn't willing to be. Well, the other part is that I had to learn to not take myself too serious.
Right.
And there's a right time to like take yourself really serious, and then there's a time not to.
So you said you maybe don't have the thickest skin at times, so you build processes.
Yep.
And that happens through often delegation, right?
Yep.
So how do you set yourself up for success in undelegating after you've delegated
Well,
something?
you learn there's signals, right? And when you're let's say a business transaction or something happens, and like for instance, I was getting annoyed by certain things. I was like, what is causing this annoyance or frustration? And it wasn't that I was better than the people I was talking to. It's just that like I needed my brain working on higher level solutions and problem solving than I did like some of that micro communication that was coming in. That was almost like the difference between being the store manager or the owner of the store versus like the person that's at the front counter who they're equally important but different functions. I needed to get out of sort of like direct like communication with like people that we weren't working with yet because I needed to be more in the back room. You know, I'm the kind of person that could set up a party and then be okay like leaving or sitting in the back room, you know, hanging out.
Right.
I have this other phrase lately that like it's not about me. Some of the most important things we have to do in life, we have to remind ourselves that it's not about ourselves. It's actually about what is in the best interest of others.
And how does that manifest itself in what your goals are?
Yeah,
Over the
I
next
think that
few
like
years?
my bigger goal was like to grow in a way that like because I care so deeply, I needed to be more extroverted to help. If I was going to be able to help my clients and more people with what I do, I needed to have a plan of like a plan that a good friend of mine named Nick Hyder, he talks about being on the offensive. There's a big difference when you're on the offensive versus on the defensive. And I think that somebody that knows that they don't have a thick skin, the person that's on the offensive, they're like, yeah, that's going to happen. That's part of life. Like,
Yeah.
you know, sometimes people might say things but like the delegation part, getting to your question, like monitoring processes and reactions and then other things and then evaluating and having feedback from other people and going, you know, I don't need to be doing that anymore. Like I need to relinquish control of that. So I look at something of like that I've really built out and I'm like, could I train somebody else to do this? Yes. There's an administrative function with owning a record label of like uploading all the metadata and, you know, and then, you know, constantly evaluating process. Like if an artist is sending you all that metadata and it's through emails, well, we should have a form to fill out. So I built that form. It'd be more automated. And then somebody else could be uploading because it's all the metadata is just like uploading all this information and scheduling it, saving it, and then make sure I can go and review it. So constantly evaluating process to make things more streamlined. And then delegating that, listening to myself for once and respecting that intuitive, very strong intuitive hunch, creative side that I have that says, I don't need to be doing that anymore. I shouldn't be doing that anymore. And not that I sit around like an entitlement and be like, I've earned the right to whatever. More like being honest with yourself and with others and saying, hey, I've been thinking that I shouldn't do that. And a lot of times people are like, oh man, I wouldn't mind doing that at all.
Right.
If we actually start communicating and asking for help, I learned a lot about asking for help and being honest about that with others and saying, hey, I don't know what to do with this. And they'd be like, oh, that's easy.
Right. Yeah, I have ways that I struggle significantly and need help on things. I look, you know, in certain ways like I have all my stuff together when you show up, but I definitely do not. That exists in those ways because the things that I struggle at, other people are helping me with, you know? Like
Exactly. Well,
moving stuff forward.
and constantly, you know, I tend to do the same things in marketing. I do the same thing every time if I'm marketing a music project because I want there to be a sense of habits for when somebody does return to me or we have a new project, we kind of know exactly what we're going to do, the structure of it. But like the branding, the songs, like the videos, like all that's going to be different. But in order to scale that, we had to do the same thing every time. Like there was a lot of creativity involved in designing process. If you do it right, that's going to allow you to be more fluid. So you don't have to think about it. So much of our creativity doesn't actually involve thinking. It actually involves like hand drawn or handwritten or, creativity is also, but it is also thinking sometimes,
Totally. Yeah.
right?
Right. I spend so much time figuring out how to save 30 seconds at a time later, over and over and over. In fact, I'll show you a couple of things on the system over there that we're like constantly trying to amplify and make, better. I have a funny question for you. It's just exploring the thought. You said self-awareness a few times. And I'm just exploring because I think it's an ironic concept, at least for me.
Yeah.
I like self-awareness is something that basically, like, how do you discover that you're not self-aware? Because your life is defined by the things you're only aware of, right?
Yes.
So,
Well, it's more of like a asking questions like, am I being present in my everyday life? For me, it came down to I'd gone through some personal things, and then I had like personal, professional things going on, and I had like all of these things going on, and I was like, oh man, I can't think straight. So I went to a friend of mine who's a psychologist, and I sat down and I said, hey man, I need to talk to someone.
yeah.
And he's like, okay. And he's like, I happen to be he's like, I'm in East Nashville. I'm like, yeah, so am I. So we met at a coffee shop. And this was in like, I think 2019. And I had my big, art book opened and I was taking notes or whatever. And he's like, can I just see that for a second? I sure. So he drew out a diagram for me.
Mm-hmm.
And my problem was that his perception at the time was that I was having sort of an identity crisis because I had a lot of like, I'd moved, I'd gone through like some relationship stuff. I was like, there was just a lot going on. I needed to sort out like, I really did need to know more about who I am because I needed to like I was becoming almost like a new person through a whole series of things that had happened. So he drew out a chart for me and it was like, a quadrant, just 4 boxes. And on the left was, the top box was self-awareness, bottom was self-management, others awareness, others management. And what he didn't know at the time was that I was going to take that over the next 4 to 5 years and I was going to flesh all that out. Because he told me a while back, about a year ago, he said, man, he goes, you took that and did things with it that I would have never imagined. And it was more like I needed just like it's almost like he gave me the map.
Right. For survival.
for survival, for thinking. Mm-hmm. And that once I understood that, I was like, oh, I just needed some thought process.
Yeah.
And I think that like self-awareness is more like I think that we and to play the other side of that, let's play the other side of the table with your question is more like we think that we know ourselves, but do we really?
Right.
And do we know, but when we go through we learn a lot about somebody when they go through a situation or a job loss or a move or a remodel. When you talk about the list of things that like couples survive through, if they can survive through this list of things, well, in the same way, those are all things that cause stress.
Yeah.
All sorts of things. And when somebody goes through a stressful state, you learn a lot about you watch them and you learn a lot about their core makeup.
Right.
How do they respond to things? And I think too that like that didn't mean that just because I had those diagrams, by no means did I have everything figured out. And it wasn't going to mean that the pain wasn't going to go away or anything else, but it gave me it's almost like a compass, right? As long as you have the compass and you know where you are, you can sort of like figure out. And what I also learned is that nobody really has it all figured out. And the older you get, the less answers that I have.
Yeah.
I only have like more questions and more philosophical musings about. And then there's a whole bunch of crap that I worried about 10 years ago that I don't need to worry about anymore.
Yeah.
I've had panic attacks.
Yeah.
Not too long ago, a couple of months ago, I was having like I had a couple of days of just ongoing panic attacks. And I don't know why. I went to the urgent care and got an EKG and all these other things.
Yeah.
And
Did you think you're having a heart attack or?
Oh, I just thought maybe I was gonna, it was time for me to buy the farm or, whatever it was. I really didn't know, but it was like a accelerated heart rate and like tingly fingers and like dizziness and all these things.
Yeah.
And then, they
Man.
were like, man, I think you're having panic attacks. What's going on? And I was like, I had a whole series of things going on. And I
Yeah.
was just overthinking all the time, wasn't sleeping.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how much when we're not in our rhythms and we're not managing our time and our all the other things in our lives that like even me I've done a lot of work, even I can go through seasons.
Oh yeah.
And I think there's some growth. What my new approach right now is questioning some fundamental elements of my life that I haven't really taken the time to think about. Maybe like, how do I approach relationships, or how do I approach, why do I eat the things that I want to eat? Or, for instance, like the things that we eat that we keep in our fridge, if you go visit someone else's house, you're like, man, they have so many options and they thought through this. And you go home and you're like, you look in your pantry and you look in your fridge and you're like, ooh, I'm like, am I not thinking about this right? Or,
Yeah.
and then, in my past life, there was other people that made those choices.
Yeah.
So when but one trip to Trader Joe's can solve all that.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
If you know what to buy. And,
Yeah, you know what to buy. You just need time to be like, and so some of that's like exploration,
Right.
right?
Everything you're just saying there is like you're indicating curiosity.
Yes.
And you mentioned, an older version of yourself that I love that you're saying, like, I'm not blaming that person. I don't have
Yep.
ill feelings towards that
Yep.
version of me. I
Yep.
was going through a lot and I had a lot of pain. When we go through trauma, it's easy to be jaded. It's easy to feel sadness and a dimmer version of the world. So a question I have for you is, what have you discovered to be successful in the ways that you have to appreciate more of the wonder and the beauty and the excitement? And I'm re-referencing last week's episode again, but the inner child.
Yeah, I think it's one thing that I think is like every day has its own story. Yeah, I'm a fan of this. I'm an author named Anne Lamott, and I could be totally mispronouncing her last name, but it's fine. And she has this idea in her book Bird by Bird where she talks about every person is born with their own emotional acre, and in that acre, it's yours to do what you want. You can plant whatever you want. You can put a garden over here. You could pave the whole thing if you want. You can let other people into your emotional acre, but like if they, start creating havoc or whatever, you can totally boot them out. And I think that like having some sort of like figurative language like that or a metaphor or whatever that helps you understand how to manage your life and your own space. I'm learning a lot about boundaries right now, about telling people that, hey, I probably spoke too soon. I'd love to talk to you more often, but I in a group setting for sure, but I really can't do that unless you're one of my clients or you're already in my story. And that's not always easy for me to do. I got some feedback recently that perhaps at times I'm too available for
Right.
phone calls and whatnot and responding to messages really quickly, and people are often shocked.
It seems gross to me to fake not being available, though. Like if you're like,
Yeah.
I'm going to be on top of it and answer so I don't have to deal with it later, right?
Yeah, but it's like a so I'm operating a lot now in do not disturb mode, which took some time to like wean myself from my phone. I think
It's my favorite.
we're
by the way.
overly connected. Yeah, it is. It definitely is. But like then the urge of like, it's funny because sometimes it's like, I don't want to do business I don't want anybody to text me or message me or anything like that. But then I definitely want like, I don't mind getting on, whatever messenger or whatever and having a conversation with somebody because what I really want is some social interaction.
Right. Yeah.
I just want some, I want to like engage with that, and then I'll be good to go work. What was our question again that we were looking after?
Well, I mean, my next question, I wanted to push into the boundaries thing, but I was talking about how to reinvent the wonder,
Oh, the
the
reinventing the wonder.
childlike excitement too.
I think that expressing gratitude every day, and then this might sound kind of out there, but as I was doing a kind of like a introspection of like who I am and who I want to be for the future in this present state that I am, the mindset of some of the things that I want to do and how I do them are super important. And I was going to need some sort of like archetype sort of thought process. And it's like, a lot of people look to superheroes or authors or whatever. And one thing that I looked at was that, I have some pretty incredible people in like my family history, that were, loggers and ranchers and business owners and like hunters and all those kind of things. And as I was doing the sort of like a thinking through about what sort of like legacy that I want to have and how I want to approach all this, rather than looking at like music, like modern business types, I was like, man, I have all of that in my family history.
Yeah.
They weren't all perfect, but they were all like, for the most part, good people, salt of the earth. I don't idolize them, but I look at like what they were and what they did and who they were with their people. And I was like, that is, I think, some of the best examples that I could pull from in this time. And right now, the main story arc, when somebody meets me, they're like, well, what do you, what do you, who are you or what? And I said, when in a Western film, when everything is going bad out on the streets and there's like a cattle baron or whatever timber baron, whatever is trying to like take the town apart, they all run to the town marshal, a guy with a big mustache. And he happens to have probably some sort of rogue friends that he can go call on. That's like a former gunfighter that owns a general store, or some young kid who's like, in his 20s that's like, is like a gun hand, or another guy that's like, some sort of character. But they all have like their own set of skills, and they're all like, they're not perfect, but it's like it's getting through the thing together rather than being separate. So in this day, the other thing I'm focusing on is like, I'm inviting other people into my storylines, and I'm allowing some others that have been vetted to, I'm going into their storylines as well. And I'm like, some of that is like intersecting with like, business and film and other things, music business and film and things like that, and exploring that versus like me trying to do everything by myself.
Right.
Because I found that my creativity levels like soar when I'm involved with like multiple other people that are like-minded, that have that same kinetic energy sort of mindset.
Yeah.
So I think that leaning into the curiosity and wonder, having a plan for that, having a mindset for that, having a story for it, surprising the hell out of people with generosity, like finding out what people in your industry really, really, really need, and then just be like, just being helpful.
Right.
And being, like there's something about, when you look at Lord of the Rings, for instance, and you look at the, whatever archetypes it was, whether it was like Elrond or Gandalf or whoever it was, there was like or Aragorn even, and then some of the, like Galadriel and some of the other women involved, there's like I've heard this before, so just because it's a myth doesn't mean it wasn't real, right? Regardless, it's like Tolkien took the time to create those archetypes and those characters. And so we can draw inspiration from all sorts of things. So I think that like, if we want to be a legend or whatever, like sometimes like we're gonna have to do like really hard things, right? And not always make it look easy. Sometimes we need to like, we need to tell people the truth, even though it's gonna hurt. We need to sometimes give, even if it hurts, and then always be ourselves, you know, even if it's going to be like it isn't going to be popular.
I think I'm just gonna
Yeah,
point
yeah,
out and acknowledge that I was kind of wondering at the beginning of our conversation about how and why you play in so many things all
yeah,
the time instead of
yeah,
having what I want to call a more specific focus.
yes,
But that answers the
yep,
question very well, that you're creatively inspired by
hmm,
being engaged with the
yep,
stimulation of like scene changing.
yep,
But I'm just acknowledging that,
yeah,
at least conceptually, I think it's an awesome path that you've done to make the cross sections
yeah,
happen with other people that are going to help be able to
yep,
sustain this over here while you're playing, over
yep.
here.
And not to mention, I have my own creative interests that are some of the driving force of. I was like, well, if I want to, do whatever it is, I'm going to need to have, well, more, more cross, let's just say like more, having more of a diverse things that I do. That being said, like, somebody asked me today, like, hey, what's your number one thing? I was like, well, I'm an independent record label. My coach now has me telling people I just own a media and entertainment business because that's true. It's like I'm in music and I'm in,
Yeah.
film production and all those kind
Yeah.
of things.
It's also terribly unspecific, but
Yeah, it's meant to be vague.
okay.
And then sometimes I just, depending on where I'm at, like if I'm in Colorado Springs, I just tell people I'm a consultant
Right.
because it doesn't,
Yeah.
I don't need to
Which is
tell.
also super clear, right?
Yeah, really, really.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm just a consultant. They're like, oh, really? Well, what? And if they ask a bunch of questions, I'm like,
Like, what does that mean? I added 2 zeros to my price. That's all.
and then sometimes
Just
I don't
teasing.
want to, I don't want to talk.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk about it. But I think that like redefining ourselves and giving ourselves definition. Like recently, I had to write a biography for something. And I like rolled my eyes, and I was like, I really don't want to do this. But I had all the information I needed. So rather than procrastinate about that, I was like, well, I'm going to hammer this out. And the guy, he texted me. He's like, hey, I'm going to need that in like the next hour. I was like, oh, great. No pressure.
Right. Right.
So, but I wrote it and then, I went and took a nap and it happened to be one of those days I was like really tired and been running end over end. And I went and took a nap. It was right before 4th of July. And I literally woke up the day before 4th of July, like an hour, 30 minutes, an hour later, whatever, and had gotten the email back that whatever I was like being vetted, being interviewed for, looked at for, or whatever, like that thing was going to really happen. And I was like, wow, I'm like,
Yeah.
that's because I'd gone and done that. But, so I'm learning a lot about having, sometimes it really pays to have all your ducks in a row, and then, a person that's trusted by people. And I've also been on the other side of it when you've lost trust. And these days, I try to make sure that if I say I'm going to do something, I do it. It's really, follow up is really critical. Not overcommitting, meaning like when we were talking earlier about developing new things. Man, so many people we overthink so many things. We're gimmick, quick fix oriented. We want the quick adrenaline rush of oh man, I got this deal and hey, and you're like, well, slow down, tell me more about that. And then as you start to question everything about the deal and look into it, you're like, well, the only way this is going to work is if these conditions exist and we have these partners involved.
Yep.
And
Yeah. Anybody that's in a hurry and pushy.
yeah.
Let's
So it's
look
like that.
much
There's
harder.
that. There's that danger there of and I don't believe that there's a perfect way of doing anything. There's always multiple ways to go at something.
Totally. I have a question that I
Yeah.
think it connects to the boundaries
Yeah.
idea. But have you read the book Radical Candor?
I've heard about it.
You should. I think you will enjoy it. I'm
Yeah.
not. I
That's
have.
the
I
second
have no
time.
way to indicate that I think you struggle with candor
Yeah.
because we haven't connected a lot. But having so many conversations in different relationships
Yeah.
and different industries, I think. So I guess my question for you really,
Yeah.
if you say you struggle with boundaries, or you're getting better now
Yeah.
at boundaries, that usually makes me feel like people feel bad for being candid.
Mm-hmm.
And this book addresses well the concept that candor is actually the kindest thing you can do to
Yeah.
somebody. So I don't
Well,
know.
I think that for me, it was more like the boundaries I needed to have was more like I actually need to be saying no more often or not yet
Yeah.
or creating a landing page where if you connect with me on Instagram to ask me about, hey man, yo, can if you send me an Instagram message and it's like, yo, I'd love to pitch my music to you, I'd be like, and whatever. I don't know if people really sound like
Can you
that,
say it
but
like that again? No, I'm just
yeah. But yo, I'd love to pitch my music to you.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be like, awesome. Fill out this form, tell me more about your project, and we'll schedule a meeting with you.
Yeah.
Because real business should be done formally. Like we might be informal people, informal in our relationships and laid back and cordial and everything. But the only real way that you can scale it is if you've had a more automated process to get all that information. That being said, hopefully that landing page, the form that they're filling out is leading to a spreadsheet that you actually have the alert set up on and all of that. But having more process, and then there's days where I'm just like, ooh, I need to just shut everything off.
How do you manage, or what's your vision at least? I know you probably
Yeah.
don't know the answer to this yet just because of
Yeah.
where you're at in growth, but how are you envisioning the scaling going, like in your perfect world, right?
Yeah.
And the reason I'm asking just
Yeah.
for context is,
Yeah.
is really about like I've gone through the process of overgrowth before
Yes.
realizing that my life sucked because of the circumstance I had put myself into. So, but you've mentioned multiple times scaling, which I get, and I love process too. But what's your vision of where perfect scaling is for you?
Man, I think it's more like constantly going, what do I need to do to release myself, release others, and release myself to be our best, highest performing versions versus, and then, what are we doing that's adding value? Is this creating revenue opportunities? Is this like best for everybody involved? Like, and listening to feedback. Like if you're getting feedback about something isn't working and it's a pattern, and then if it happens, if the same outcome happens with like different people multiple times, you're like, oh, and what's causing that? And then looking at ways to like, have those conversations to make sure that those things happen. So always evaluating process, which is like, it's like constantly looking at what are opportunities to like, and then moving through things quickly. I think just speed of things is critical, even if it drives you crazy. Last week, I think it was Thursday night, I'd gone to a writer's round to go support somebody, and then didn't stay late. I was like, right after that round was over, I went home because I knew I was going to need to do like about an hour's worth of just administrative work because I was going to try to be off on a half day on Friday. And if I give my word to somebody, to me, it's like really critical that, we get those things done.
Yeah.
And communicate things like, hey, here's your release link for your new single, and this is the release date that we met.
What advice would you give to young, ignorant artist that doesn't have probably enough life experience to understand when they're getting screwed over or not? And they're trying to get engaged with the music industry that is full of really, really great people and a few bad apples that can really take advantage of people.
Yep. I would say, there's a lot of like online communities you can reach out to. Like, there's like young entertainment professionals with the YEP group for Facebook in Nashville. The Reddit is really good. YouTube, I'm a big fan of YouTube. Podcasts, and then there's always people who are willing to help.
Mm-hmm.
And if you approach people in the right way, if they're in the music industry, chances are, some of them might be like, yeah, it's it's not a free consult, but if you're going to pay somebody for a consult, or if you're going to ask them for a free consult, like, hey, can I go to coffee with you? And I have some things going on I need to talk about. Like, just make sure you have an agenda and you're really clear. And have you done all your research first before you go and ask for somebody's wisdom, and then what is in it for them, and then just being like, a lot of times we only think about our own situation. If you're gonna go to coffee with somebody, like, respect their time, be very clear about what you want to do, be organized, and then asking for help, like people like to help other people. And I would also say that there's probably some older artists, and then artists themselves who are older and wiser, like, most likely, like, they'll know somebody that you can talk to. So the chances are that the answer is probably within proximity. You just need to, like, figure out the right avenue. And honestly, like, if somebody reached out to me on Instagram or some other platform, I'd probably help them out.
Yeah.
I mean, that's,
But you gotta have boundaries, though.
but we got to have boundaries. And it may not be me. It may be somebody else on my team, or
totally
maybe
with you.
somebody else that they can, or I have them to reach out to you,
Right? Yeah. Put
you
it
have
on
a
me.
podcast.
I have all the time in the world, right?
Right.
I'm just kidding. I'm pretty good at filtering what my next steps are, but maybe I'm not. How do people find you?
Man, Instagram's probably the best way. Jim Gray online.
If you enjoyed this episode, please consider sharing with other people you think might gain value from it. My name is Seth Schaefer. This is Behind the Act.